Welcome. So I didn't expect that to happen. That buzzing noise that was going off. Actually, there's a story there, which I'll tell you at some point. But I am a type 1 diabetic, and I have all sorts of medical devices that are attached to my stomach and that look like cell phone devices to tell me when my numbers are not where they're supposed to be. So if you hear it, don't panic. I'm going to try to keep myself close to it to get it to be quiet. But sadly, these things are like built to make people like me keep us safe. So it's actually what got me into my journey in philanthropy. Was my mom was an executive director of the Juvenile Diabetes Foundation, now known as JDRF. And so growing up, volunteerism and giving back was a huge part of our family, trying to find a cure for this chronic disease I lived with, and gave myself insulin injections every day and did all the stuff. So it's kind of what created my foray into this crazy world of what I do today. But with that said, I do have a funny story to start out with sharing with you. Yesterday, I had the adventure of my life. So how many of you, I'm going to guess probably a lot, have done snowmobiling? Show of hands. Okay, I had never done it, right? I'm a Vegas girl. I'm used to sunshine, and I'm sitting there going, and here's Mr. Grant at his best saying, you're going to get out there. David's like, you're going to get out there and you're going to have some fun. And I will tell you, there was this one particular hill that was very steep, and everyone else was going down it. And I was just like at the top in my snowmobile, just staring at it, thinking, oh my gosh, like, I'm going to hurt myself. I had just tipped the snowmobile a little bit before that, and now I'm sitting here looking down going, do I take the plunge? Anyway, eventually I did it. I survived. I'm still standing here today, which is the good news. But I will share with you, it reminded me when I added this slide last night. Dave was kind enough to take photos. This is me with my arms up, just celebrating that I'm alive and I survived. You can't really see the photo. This is my husband next to me, but it was one of those adventures where I said, this is very similar to entrepreneurship, right? Feeling the fear and doing it anyway. And whether it's a roller coaster ride, which I do love those scare me less than snowmobiling. But anyway, here's a few more just fun photos from our day. But and Professor Stillman was there as well. Yeah, there's Dave and his lovely wife, and we just had a great group of folks yesterday. But with that said, I think one of the things when you get onto the road to entrepreneurship is being prepared for ups and downs and curves and turns and those moments where you go, holy crap, can I do this? Am I going to be able to actually take the plunge and do what I want to do? So I'm curious just if you would just shout out what comes to mind. When I say entrepreneur, what's the first word, person, thing, phrase that comes to your mind? It's all quiet. There's no wrong. Yeah. Adventurous. Okay. Independent. Creative. I didn't hear the business. What'd you say? Businessman, businesswoman. Okay. Anything else? Oh, risky. Is that why you're nodding your head? Someone else, yes, was ready to say that too. Yeah, I would agree with all that. And one of the things that I will tell you, I've had probably since I first got my foray into entrepreneurship that I've really had to check myself on is that I don't look, and my business doesn't look like a typical entrepreneurial company. It doesn't look, I don't necessarily act like a typical entrepreneur. I think that has actually served me well in the type of work I do. But it's interesting because society tells us, right, this is what an entrepreneur looks like. This is, here's the people of the Oprah Winfrey, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, the list goes on. Here's what success looks like, right? And at the end of the day, there's also a lot of other stories of success that can look differently. So today I'm going to share with you a little bit about that. For me, I consider myself a social entrepreneur. It's a bit different, right? My end goal is not about scaling, growth, and money. My end goal is trying to make a bigger impact on the community and on our world. So that is really what drove me to get started when I first began doing all this. So speaking of where it all began, it's interesting because there were 5 key pillars that really influenced me going into business for myself. And let's start with the bad bosses pillar. I don't know if anyone's brave enough to raise their hand. Has anyone had a bad boss? Okay, yeah. We've all had them, sadly, right? Anyone willing to share what made your boss not that great? What made them a bad boss?
He jeopardized my sales.
Jeopardized your sales. Okay.
Kind of weird.
Yeah, that's kind of like you would think a boss would want to support and not jeopardize the sales, right? That's weird. Anybody else?
He expected higher standards from his employees, but wasn't willing to be an example of that.
Oh, wow. So, yeah.
Wanted them to show up on time, but then he wouldn't show up.
So he didn't walk the talk, right? He was like, I get my own rules, and they're not the same rules as you. Did I see someone? Yeah.
Mine was like verbal abuse, kind of. Like, just very disrespectful in the workplace.
I'm sorry to hear that, because that's not cool. Well, when I tell you about my first bad boss experience, sadly, I'm going to be able to relate a little bit to what you did. Mine actually probably could stem on physical abuse. So I had gotten my first job out of college was working at Bellagio Hotel. And at the time, Bellagio was, right, like the creme de la creme to work at. I had been hired to work in their human resources department and help create all of the buzz and energy around all the employees that were very like top-notch people in their professions and in their industries. And I was supposed to create the internal buzz and external buzz. So kind of the PR communications end of getting people excited about, look, we just hired this executive chef. Look, we just hired this entertainer. And that's where I started. And I never connected with the boss from day one. And there's probably a lot of reasons for that. But one day in particular, I remember I had given her a stack of things I had written. She called me to her office and she said, will you reach out your hand, Stacey? So I reached out my hand. Next thing you know, she says, turn your hand over. I turn my hand over and she smacks my hand. She smacks my hand. She throws all the papers in the air and she says, this is crap. So I remember being in shock. I remember being stunned. I didn't know how to react. I ended up in tears because I was just stunned. And what was interesting about it is at the time, because Mr. Steve Wynn, who's got quite the reputation, but he was, the owner of this. And everyone who knows about working with Mr. Wynn knows that he is a tough person to work for and work for his companies. And so after this happened, I talked to a couple of my college professors because who had connections. And I said, is this something I should pursue a lawsuit for? I know this wasn't right. I want to stand up for my rights. And sure enough, I was guided very promptly by every single one of them. You don't want to mess with the Wynn machine. You will never get another job in the city. So that was a really hard decision and crossroads I had to make at the time about what do I do. I'm a bit more of a fighter today than I was then. I probably would choose a different path at this point. But back then I was like, okay, I'm just getting started. I'm just getting my career. But that was a bad boss, right? Then my next, one other quick example, just that was kind of like still stuns me to this day. So after I left, I left Bellagio pretty quickly after that happened by choice. And I worked a couple other little jobs and then ended up getting what I thought was my dream job. Because remember, I started my whole life started with philanthropy and volunteerism and giving back. So I got hired to work at the Nevada Community Foundation. And what was cool is I got to work with people that had lots of money, didn't necessarily know what to do with it or how to make the biggest impact. And then I got to work with the nonprofits and try to connect them to those people and try to help both parties have a kind of a win-win situation. First day on the job, I get called into my boss's office and I'm sitting across the desk from her and she has this canister of pens and pencils and she pours them on the desk. And then she slowly starts taking them one by one and creating this horizontal line on the desk. And she says, that half of the desk is your half and this half is mine. And I'm looking at her and I start laughing. I'm like, oh, like thinking she's being funny. She's not being funny. She's like, we are going to share a desk and we're going to share a computer. And whenever I have a personal call, you get to step outside of the room. So I was like, what did I do? And I remember at the time I was engaged to my now husband of 22 years. And I remember going home crying my eyes out going, what have I done? Do I have this bad luck spell over me, right? I seem to keep attracting this. But I will tell you, it is such a reason why I was compelled to become my own boss. Because of these kinds of situations, I was like, I'm not doing this anymore. I work my tail off. I work hard. Everyone else gets all the credit. I don't get treated right. I want to be my own boss and do this the right way. So there was that piece. The Wild West, right? So the Wild West of Las Vegas, whether you love it or hate it, Las Vegas is people who think they're going to make, their greatest buck and the greatest, success of their life in Las Vegas. Not deeply philanthropic, right? There's much more deep, entrenched historical philanthropy in other parts of the country, including, lots of like older communities in the East Coast. So as much as that's a challenge for a kind of business that I wanted to create tied to philanthropy, I was also like, it's a huge opportunity because I know there's people who have big hearts and care. They came from other places. They want a sense of community. And how do I figure out a way to build that? So that also was something that I kind of thought might work in my favor from that Wild West spirit. Identified a need. So when I was working at the Community Foundation, one of the things that I started to quickly become aware of was that you had philanthropists and people with the money and companies with the money, and you had nonprofits who were trying to pitch those people to get the money, but neither one of them were speaking each other's language, and neither one of them actually truly understood it from the other's vantage point. So as a result, there were all these missteps, and they weren't making the impact that either of them really wanted to make. And so they didn't know. They were well-intentioned, but didn't have the first clue about how you be strategic when you're giving and how you do it in a thoughtful way that furthers the organization you're trying to support as well as some of your own personal goals. So that felt like a huge opportunity for me, and I didn't get a lot of time to do it there. I got a little bit. I got to scratch the surface, but I kept thinking, gosh, if I could just have more time with every single one of these people in a deeper way, helping stand by them, walk side by side with them to help them figure this out, imagine what we could do. So I identified this need. Similar to that, nobody else was doing it. So here I work at a community foundation that is supposed to be doing some of it, but doesn't have the capacity to do all of it. And there were a lot of other consultants in town, fundraising consultants, but I was like, no one is particularly focused on marrying the two of these together, right? Marrying nonprofits and their generous supporters together, figuring out ways to open up dialogue and conversation, helping make each stronger together. Because if you think about it, it makes sense, right? If you strengthen one side of that, so let's say you have nonprofits that become rock stars and they're really savvy and they know how to, fundraise and they know how to, make the biggest impact with their programs. But then you have philanthropists that still don't get it. It's not going to work out because the philanthropists are going to be trying to fund things in a different way than the nonprofits need. So I was like, we have to create and rise the tide for both, right? Both have to get stronger to make the community stronger and to have a stronger impact. So that was another sort of part of it. And also knowing that there was opportunity because no one was doing it. And then, oh my gosh, the desire for freedom, right? I loved that idea, right? Because I was not to some, the person who said their boss never shows up to work on time. I struggled with it. I was never one that loved coming in at a set time and staying there for so long. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is painful. Like, I'll get the work done, but do I have to do it in these set 8 to 5 hours? So that desire for freedom, that desire for being able to create, make my own decisions, figure out who I wanted to work with. Because let's be honest, not everybody do we want to work with, right? Not everybody is aligned with us. I was like, that'd be pretty cool to have that level of freedom. So lo and behold, right? This girl decides, I'm going to do it, but I'm not going to leap into this. So unlike sometimes what we hear about traditional entrepreneurs that wake up one morning and give up everything to go do it, I was not that person. I had a plan, right? And my plan was, I'm going to spend 6 to 9 months. I'm going to research what's going on in the market. I'm going to figure out if there's people like me doing the kind of thing I want to do in other parts of the country. I'm going to look at how much money I'm going to need to survive if I don't have paying clients right away, right? All of those kinds of things I started to think through. I also started to socialize the idea a bit among friends, family, even among, I worked with a very entrepreneurial real estate developer in Vegas, still a dear friend. He's my oldest. He and his significant other, Hillary, are my oldest, kind of oldest, truest, most loyal clients to this day. They started with me. They were my first client, and they still are my client today, and I'm so grateful for that. But I talked to him because I said, can I pick your brain a little? What advice do you have to give me? And it was interesting because people love sharing their advice, right? People love talking about themselves, sharing their wisdom. So I didn't realize what I was doing at the time, but it was kind of like a secret to my success, because it was like, all I have to do is ask you, like, what did you do to be successful? It's a compliment to you, and you get to share it with me, and I get to learn a thing or two. So all of that sort of helped build it up. It also was, he ended up agreeing. I said, all right, I'm not asking you to leave the community foundation. I'm not trying to take you away from them. But there's some other things I think I could do with your philanthropy that you're not currently doing. Would you be willing to be my first client? Now, this is before I've even started, set up my business structure. But I wanted that security of knowing I had somebody already in the door that was going to help give me at least some income, because my husband and I were young. We needed to figure out, we both needed our incomes. My husband was super supportive in this, and I'm grateful for that. But I also knew that I had to deliver. I couldn't just sit there and start this with a lot of risk without having some source of at least modest income coming in. So that was cool, because I had the first kind of anchor client to get the business started. So like I said, I planted the seeds. June 2006 is when the company was born. And this year, we're officially old enough to vote, right? We're 18 years old. So I was like, all right, we've survived quite a bit along the way. And that's just a snapshot of who we are and what we do. I have a small and mighty team. I did not want to deal with employee problems. So my entire model is subcontractor based. So it's me. And to be honest, when you set up a company, particularly if it's named after yourself and it's your reputation that gets people to buy into the company, they expect to see you. So that's probably been one of the challenges of this kind of model, as far as it's not something that every client, every individual I touch needs to feel like they have some interaction with me at some stage in the process. For me, that has meant coming in on the front end of certain engagements so I can, give the warm welcome, do the nice handoff to a subcontractor that's got expertise to help them. On some cases, I still stay with them and help the client all the way through. And other times, people are more behind the scenes supporting me to get, the action, to get all the deliverables taken care of. And then I make sure at the end, I do a midway check-in, and then at the end, I say, so how did this go for you? Like, what could we have done better, right? Always asking for that feedback. So that was, a little bit of kind of my approach to this. And it's worked really well for me. But I will tell you, it is hard, because there are some times when I do try to delegate this out, right, and say, here, I want you to work with this person who's way smarter than I am at doing this stuff to help you. And people go, well, no, we want you. And that is still always, and I don't say that out of ego. I say that it's actually a problem, right? It's a problem with me being able to grow my business past a certain size. So that's just the reality you have to realize if you get into this kind of work. So I'm going to go through this briefly, and obviously for those I might be able to see during lunch, or if you want to chat afterward, I'm willing to dive in further. But I've learned sort of a lot more than 10, but I was trying to consolidate and think about what are the key ones I want to share. Not putting all my eggs in one basket. So when I started in 2006, I mentioned I had that anchor client, and I ended up getting a couple of other smaller clients, but that anchor client was my anchor client for the first 2 to 3 years, and was probably about 85 to 90% of the money I was bringing in at that stage. And then 2008 happens. And I don't know, for those of you who remember, 2008, it's like the world crashed, right? The economy crashed, everything went south. And so here I have a huge philanthropist that's been wildly successful in real estate and land development, and he was a huge risk taker, right? I can't even imagine the risk he put. And he lost big, right? He ended up going bankrupt, had to do a lot of restructuring with his companies and his models. And so he still stayed, he and his significant other have stayed a client the entire time, but it went from, 90% of probably the revenue I was bringing in to 5%, 10% overnight. And they're still steady today. And I will always, they got me started. I'm forever loyal. But that really was a big wake up call, because it was like, oh my goodness, I'm only 2 or 3 years into business. This happened. How am I going to survive? So I quickly had to make some adjustments. I had to start getting a little more aggressive with going out there. I had to start leaning on relationships and contacts I had. And it was, I have a lot of gray hairs that I cover up with hair dye to prove it. So one of the things that I did find that was helpful for me when that all started to crumble was the idea of, how do I take some of the really big names that I have worked with at the Community Foundation, reconnect with them, and now have them become my clients. They can still do whatever they're doing at the Community Foundation, but I can help them in a different way. So I opened up and opened up those doors again and talked to MGM Resorts, talked to Boyd Gaming, talked to the founder of eBay, Pierre and Pam Omidyar, and their foundation. So went back to some of those people I had the, distinct honor of serving at the Community Foundation and said, hey, I think I could help you this way. Instead, would you be open to a conversation? So not only did that help me a lot during this hard time, but also these were not actually the biggest clients. Believe it or not, some of my biggest money has come from nonprofit organizations, which people find funny. They're like, nonprofits don't have money. Some nonprofits do have money, and some nonprofits are looking for the guidance to support them. But even with these large named companies and philanthropists, the key was, now I had this list of names I could say were my clients that I could put on my website, right? That I could do all the things with it. I could market it, and then it attracted others. It was kind of like, it just was a ripple effect. So incredibly valuable for me, and still have their names. Some of them I haven't done work with recently, some I have, but keep their names out there. Get testimonials from them. Say, please, will you be willing to share your experience working with me? Specialize instead of generalize. So one of the things that I also found out was that because I was in a state of fear when the market crashed, it became easy to lose sight of what I really started doing. And I would say yes to just about any kind of job, right? So people would say, oh, we need you to help us with this. We need you to help us do a search and hiring process for our executive director. We need you to write marketing copy for our website. We need you to write grants. I knew how to do this roughly, or I figured out I could teach myself. The amount of energy spent, right, into trying to learn and become an expert in something that wasn't my expertise and wasn't my passion really was exhausting. So it didn't serve me well. It sort of diffused what I really was meant and known for. So I still struggle with this, you guys. I still, even, it was great. Like at the time, I understand why it happened. Still to this day, there's times where I go, oh, if there's not enough business in the pipeline, it is easy when someone needs your help to just say yes. But it has never served me. And it's good to say this again today to remind myself of that, right? So looking beyond the four walls. So that was another big lesson for me. I think that early on, I was so focused on just doing all the work that all the clients needed. I wasn't stepping outside of the four walls and really trying to think about, what could this, what's going on out there in the environment? What do I need to know about market changes? What's happening with the philanthropic landscape that's changing, right? I need to know all that stuff. So I wasn't at the time doing that. And then I started to, partly what kicked my butt into gear, there was a woman who, not my favorite human, but ended up a few years after I started my company, setting up a company that was very similar to what I was doing. And hers was 100% focused on philanthropists and the big named philanthropists. I know Dave's sitting here trying to figure out who it is, aren't you, Dave? We'll have to talk after. Starts with a J. Oh, the company, M. Yes, it starts with an M. We're talking in code. Anyways, she was a very different style than me. She has a lot of gifts to give and resources to give. And she is like a very big name in the community. And philanthropists who want their names in the big bright lights plastered over everything, those are her people because she's amazing with those people. Those aren't the kinds of philanthropists I've chosen to work with. I am much more comfortable and just happier working with people who are a little more under the radar, that are like, I want to do my philanthropy quietly. I just want somebody who's going to help me like do good in the world, and I don't need all the bright lights. And those are my people. And so I feel like that was helpful when she came out there because I was nervous. It was like, she's going to swallow up any little bit of business I have in that area. And to be honest with you, it all worked out. And it seems like we just play in different parts of the sandbox. And even though it's similar work, it's different. So that was important and really made me realize the lesson of making sure I'm paying attention to what's going on around me, so I know how to position myself competitively. The other thing, I joined a mastermind group early on and made a huge investment of time and money and resource to put into this thing. So it was a one-day mastermind group. It's like your own advisory board, but without having all the headaches of an advisory board. And I would go one day a month and spend the entire day with people who were in different lines of business, who all were entrepreneurs like me. And we learned from each other. I learned so much from these people. Many of them were larger than I was, but that was cool, right? Because I was like, I'm gonna be that someday. I'll get there. And so that was just incredibly rewarding, and was something that still to this day serves me well, being a part of some kind of group like that, and really just paying attention to what others are doing and what's going on beyond the four walls. Any Aaron Rodgers fans in here? And I'm sorry if this is, I am a Bills fan. But anyways, we do need to know when it's time to move on, right? And this is a much longer story. So it's one that I would love to share with you at some point, but I will share this with you. I will say that from an overarching perspective, I have held on too long. It is my Achilles heel. I hold on too long because I'm loyal to a fault. So I hold on to clients that aren't good clients too long. I hold on to subcontractors or people doing work with me too long because I really believe in them. And I think, I think it comes from a good place, but it doesn't serve the business well at times, right? Because there's times you have to part ways and say thank you and have the hard conversations. And I have had those hard conversations, but it's not my natural go-to. And sometimes you learn after doing things and losing in a big way that you could have done it a little differently or a little better. So anyway, it's time to move on sometimes. Staying top of mind. I don't actually wear ridiculous outfits like the dog, but what I do try to do, I don't like self-promotion. I think some people do a much better job at that. So what I've had to do over the years is go, all right, I'm not going to be the best marketer of myself. So how do I get other people around me who can market me, right? Like who can market me better than I ever will. And that's probably going to be more powerful too. So finding somebody who I've invested in a lot of PR and marketing over the years, people who make me sound much fancier, who, submit nominations. So I get a bunch of awards, who get me on the front page of the newspaper, whatever. So I found ways around something that's a weakness of mine. I also make myself every year, force myself. I don't love the little stupid small talk, but you got to do it. And I force myself every year to pick the most sort of the events that I will get in front of the most influencers and people who could potentially want to do business with me. And I'm very strategic about thinking about how do I get in front of them and make sure I go to these events. So those are sort of some of the few ways I've used to try to stay top of mind. Getting a couple of certifications, which Dave, mentioned in the intro, and things that then I can market. Hey, I've got this, right? So things that just continue to make me and the company feel like we're keeping fresh and we're keeping up with the times. Treating relationships like gold. So I think that this is probably takes up the biggest part of my time in my company, right? Thinking about how to maintain relationship, to not just reach out to people when I need something, right? I get annoyed when that happens and someone is always just reaching out to me with the handout, like just say the handout saying, we need your help. That's frustrating to me. I'm like, is that like all I'm good for? So figuring out ways that I can just connect with someone as a human and say, how are you doing? Right? Like what's going on in your world? Anything you need right now, like coming at it from a different vantage point has helped serve me well. And, I think about the start of my business, it was a lot of good friends and a lot of people that just, we had, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, that came through for me. I had my first ever website designed when I started my company by a friend who did that professionally, who just did it for me pro bono because she knew I didn't have the budget, right? I had someone else who did all my legal documents and legal instruments at the time, all my, kind of company operating agreement and bylaws kind of stuff, did all that stuff for me, and did it all for free. Like they didn't charge me anything. And I was so lucky to have that. But that came from relationships, and that came from trying to make sure those people knew they were important to me beyond just what they could do for me. Getting clear on your definition of success. This one has been incredibly difficult for me, particularly the last couple of years, because back to where I started with the entrepreneurship journey, what most people want to hear when they say, how are you doing? How's your business doing? They want to hear you saying you grew, you added this many staff, you added these new locations. And because my business model isn't set up that way, I've sometimes struggled over the years of how do I define success in a way that others, can appreciate, and not get into that trap myself of just thinking, okay, it was my most profitable year in business. That means it was my most successful. So 2022 was my most profitable year in business. And I will tell you, it was the worst year of my entire 18 years doing this. And I worked myself to the ground. My subcontractors were worked hard. We all were burned out. And it was at that stage at the end of the year when I thought, I don't know if I can do this anymore, right? I don't have any more in me to give. I don't know if what I'm doing makes a difference. That's scary when you get to that place. It was true burnout. It was the actual definition of what burnout is, all three elements. And that's scary when you've built your whole life in business and you now don't know if you want to do it anymore. And you're not sure if, you even have the energy or desire to do it anymore. That was a scary place to be. And it's because I worked myself to death. And really it had all just caught up with me. So I think for 2023 was a recalibration year. 2024 is a little bit of that. 2023, I took a hit. I didn't bring in as much money, but I felt so much happier and full of life and energy at the end of the year. And I was and I had happier people I was working with, and we weren't all just killing ourselves. And I was like, you know what? I care about human beings. That's why I got into this business. I care about myself. I care about others. So maybe it isn't just about the buck and the bottom line. I've always been a workaholic from the time I was born. So that's probably not going away, but maybe there's ways to add some more dimension to my life. So really getting clear on what is success, your why of why you're doing it. Embracing the storms. So that was a big storm that I shared. It's not all sunshine and roses. So thinking about some of that. One particular story I remember, I had an independent contractor, a brilliant young woman who I had hired right out of UNLV, and she was brilliant. And she ended up basically saying to me after she had developed, I had her creating materials for some of our clients and some of our trainings we were doing. She was just phenomenal. And one day she said to me, so do I get a cut out of she was getting paid to do what she did. Do I get a cut out of every single thing that now you're selling for the company? And at the time, I did not know this rule. I do know it very well now. But at the time, I did not know that subcontractors actually own the intellectual property they've created for the company. My contract didn't cover it. employees can sit there. It's different when they're an employee, but because she was a subcontractor, not an employee, there was a different law and a different rule. So that was a huge, huge growing pain and lesson. We ended up working out an arrangement and ended up fine. She eventually went off. She actually went to BYU for her graduate degree, but wish her well. And in some ways, I mean, as much as I was ticked off when it happened, I also was like, good for you, girl. Like, you know the rules more than me, and you stood your ground. I mean, I was gritting my teeth while I was saying it, but I was also like, good for you. I don't know if when I was your age, I would have done that. So anyways, there's always storms like that. And so thinking about how you put others around you and put other resources around you to help you get through those storms is so important. And last but not least, walking the talk, that was in my bio. It's important to me that people know that I want to be just everything I'm trying to help other people do. I want to be that same person. So I have to do a lot of looking in the mirror. There's times I fall off track, but I have to be. So for me, it's all right. I make a commitment to my husband and I give a lot charitably through my company. I'll do 10% of the revenues every year. Some depending on the year, sometimes it's gross revenue, sometimes it's net, but it doesn't matter. The point is we give it, right? And then, just volunteer time, like saying, I want people who work in my circle and work for my company also to be giving back, because I want us to walk the talk of what we're trying to help others do. So huge part that has kept me grounded and I try to keep myself authentic. So with that, before any closing remarks, I would love to just open it up. There's questions, any reflections or stories you have that I may have triggered today? Yeah.
What are some traits that you find in people that are super successful?
Oh, that's a great question. What are traits that I find with people who are super successful? I do think hard work, but with that, a really strong work ethic of knowing where it's not just about working hard, but it's also about knowing what is sort of in your mind, what is right or wrong, what are those lines you will or won't cross. I think that's huge. I think resilience, right? I mean, I think how many times when you get knocked down or you feel like the bottom's falling out, having the strength to problem solve and find other solutions. I also think some degree of innovation, right? So trying to think about what is a new way I can solve a problem? What is a new way I can kind of tackle this that might be a way that resonates with others? And then the last, I would probably say for me, I mean, there's a lot, but empathy. I think really putting yourself in someone else's shoes, it helps you with marketing to customers. It helps you understand, like if you put yourself as much as you can, understand their situation and their story, I think you do a better way of connecting with them and quite frankly, selling to them when you really understand what their needs are and pain points are. Thank you for that question. Great question. Anybody else? Yeah.
You briefly mentioned you try and find conferences to go to find like influencers who might want to work with you. What are some other ways that you find clients for your type of work?
So for me, it has been very largely a lot of speaking. So I love speaking, and that served me well. Because when I get in front of an audience, then usually there's a couple of people oftentimes that will say, hey, I think we could use your services. So it's a natural, it's sort of feeder system into it. So conferences that I have not done hardcore marketing. I find with my industry, I mean, there's times where I've experimented with ads in different places and digital ads and putting it in all the philanthropy kind of publications. I haven't found that to be successful. So for me, it's also been about building a network of people who are my natural referral sources. So I could probably count, maybe it would be two hands of a lot of repeat business that comes from the same referral sources. I'm making sure I take care of those people in a good way, right? Because they're the ones who keep sending people my way because they're naturally wired to do it. So, yeah.
Where do you see your company in 5 years?
Where do I see my company in 5 years? Yeah, that's a great one. I actually am sort of moving a bit more toward leadership development work, particularly some of the certifications that were mentioned. So one of the things I find is while I can help a board be a better board with all the technical pieces of that and the tools of that, while I can help consult a nonprofit who needs to fundraise better, while I can do a strategic plan, at the end of the day, without good leadership, it means nothing. Any of those things I try to teach and train on. So for me, leadership development, like actually offering a lot more workshops, actually doing more things that get leaders. I find there's also this mid-level tier of leaders that I'm looking to tap into, because you see a lot of education and conferences designed for people at the top of their game, but the people that are sort of right there in the middle, like, you've got entry-level employees, you've got sort of those who have kind of moved their way up to CEO, but there's this middle layer that are all going to be taking over at some point that don't have basic management skills, that don't know what it means to have conflict and how to deal with it. So I'm actually looking right now, building out some things with that. So I see a lot more of that for my company. And that really being cross-cutting across a lot of different industries. It's also easier to replicate that. I can teach. There's less I need Stacey with that model, and more of I can create little, other people with different personalities and different fits. So I can try to extend it beyond just people needing and wanting. I mean, some people will still get me, but like, I just can't be all things to all people all the time. So thank you. I can't, if I could figure out how to create replicas, right? But yeah.
Who specifically comes to mind when you think about mentorship when you first started out?
Wow. Who comes to mind when I think about mentorship when I was first starting out? I have two people that come to mind. When I was in my 20s and I was working at the Community Foundation, because I started my company when I was 30. Do the math, I'm 48 now. Just had a birthday. Can't believe I'm 48. Anyway, but at the time when I was starting out, I had someone who I had gone through, my organization had invested in me going through a leadership development program. And I had 3 to 4 days with this intensive coach, me and a small cohort of people. And at the end, we had to be put in a hot seat where we had to bring up a question we wanted her to coach us through. And I don't even remember what the nature of my question was, but it had nothing to do with what she asked me. And she looked at me and she goes, "Do you go to work sick?" And I literally at that point just burst into tears, because I was that person that would go to work sick. I had had just some pretty serious incidents at the office, not that short before, where I ended up having to go to the hospital, but I was working. So one of my colleagues had to take me to the hospital because I was so sick. So it was a really interesting, pivotal moment of realizing that whole, if I don't figure out how to take care of myself better and more, then I'm never going to sustain. And I remember she looked at me and she looked me dead in the eyes, and I was probably about 26, 27 at the time. And she goes, "I'm going to be pissed off if you're dead by the time you're 30. And that scared me, but it was the path I felt like I was going. So that was one kind of in the moment. And then longer term, I have, I'm dear friends and have had the joy of partnering and working with her in different ways. Our most immediate past president at UNLV, Marta Miana. And Marta has the most skillful way of managing people, dealing with hard situations of conflict. And so every time I get an ounce of energy or time with her, I always love just listening to her because I learn something new. It's never about the technical side. It's about the people side and how you deal with sort of the people dynamics and all those that come up. So for me, that's been most helpful. But both of those people just sort of coming into my path and kind of realizing along the way that they really could help me grow. So I was lucky. And I think all of us have those gifts in our lives. It's just about being able to recognize someone that may even look completely different than what you do, what you want to do, but have some good lessons. So thank you.
Stacey Wedding, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.